forces. The seal on that is that the eldest son gets an education, and the first real parental argument I can remember, you've all sat on the stairs at some point, listening to a domestic dispute below, and this one I followed with particular interest because my mother was saying, we have to find the money to send Christopher to a proper school, and my father was saying, as far as I knew, truthfully, well, we haven't got the money. And Yvonne, as I always called her, because it was her name, and because it was the name by which I loved her, said, look, Eric, that was my father's name, if there's going to be a ruling class in this country, Christopher is going to be a member of it. And I thought, as one does sitting in the dressing gown at the top of the stairs, the jammies, yes. I was a bit nervous about going away to school at the age of 7, but I knew that it was my only chance. And that exemplifies the difference. My mother was a very outgoing, very extrovert, very rather optimistic, very beautiful woman with an interest in fashion and a sort of lust for life, which had been denied her by the very dreary circumstances of being a Navy wife in a time of austerity. And I say, she was the cream in the coffee. She was the gin in the Campari for me. And my father was a very honest and decent, but very depressed and rather pessimistic guy. And so how can I put this properly? I got out of that sort of lower middle class, very conservative background. I went to schools where none of the other boys had any idea they were lucky. They didn't think that they were privileged. I thought I was lucky. They took it completely as their due. They just thought it was their right to have an education away from the oiks and the proles. So that had a very revolutionary effect on me. And my father had been let go by the Navy after Suez, passed over for promotion and dumped with a lower pension than the officers who then joined, who hadn't been in the war, as he had been very bravely. So I thought, there's another case, someone who's been very loyal to the conservative interest, but has nothing to show for it, has been essentially sold out by it. So that moved me very strongly and quickly to the left, but I didn't forget that these virtues of martial valor, thrift, and so on were worth having. And I thought that they might even come in handy as socialist virtues too. So it wasn't rebellion as such, it was an attempt to transmute the lead into some kind of gold.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most moving bits of the book is you're looking for the anti-fascist fight in your parents. The notion that there should be one or 2 days when life is really worth living.
Yes.
And if there's any kind of theme in this book, it's that your parents had that, your father had that when he helped to bring down the Scharnhorst, and your aunt had it when they sort of went over in Dunkirk and D-Day. And the fight is to find those days, to find enemies that are worth fighting and fight them. And that you saw that in your parents as well as...
Yeah, they were all church-going, well, not my mother, as I'll say in a second, but church-going, patriotic, monarchical, pro-empire. But my father's ship on Boxing Day 1943 sent a big Nazi battleship right to the bottom of the sea, which is a better day's work than any I've ever done. And my aunt Ina, as a nurse, was in Wave 2 in Normandy and got all the way to Berlin before they stopped her. And my mother, who I think had a different motive, having come from a Jewish family in Liverpool for disliking Nazism, also joined the Wrens, as they called it, the Women's Royal Navy Service, and went to a very bitter job in Scapa Flow. So there was nothing to deplore in this, even though I felt that they were, so to speak, all voting for the wrong party and admiring the things like monarchy and empire that I didn't think you needed to admire to be against fascism.
But
so it was interesting and complex in that way.
Yeah, it is complicated because the real opposition to them was that they were kind of defeated, weren't they? I mean, your father was kind of defeated. So he knew about the Falklands and had played some, and knew more about the Falklands than you did, but he didn't support the regaining of the Falklands because he thought, well, too hard to...
Yes, he thought it was all over. He thought, if you read the poems of Philip Larkin, say, or even at a lower level, the letters of Dennis Thatcher to Private Eye. You have an impression of the way my father would talk when the gin was getting a bit low. You know, it's all up with the old country. The place is run by yobs now. People get rich by making money, not by earning it. And all of this was, he didn't know it was a satire in a way on Thatcherism and on some kinds of capitalism, but it was just a feeling that the baser element had triumphed and that the old glories were departed.
But your mother, of course, was significantly different from this in terms of her preparedness to get out of it, or her desire to escape from this.
Oh, she tried so hard. She tried so hard to get out of it. She wanted to open a dress shop. She wished she could have cocktail parties that people would come to. She signed me up at the Chichester Festival Theatre, a name which still sounds to me like a knell in certain ways. Wanted there to be gaiety and art and humor, and having, as both of them had, you know, life first of the slump, the recovery from the First World War, then the war, another one, and then a long period of austerity, rationing, poverty. By that time, they were in their 50s. Where had the youth gone? Where had it all gone? I remember feeling, it's an awful thing to feel sorry for your parents, but I did. I felt protective of them. I thought I was bringing them up. But she always had a resource of wit to help out on that.
But then when she did
and she bought me a dinner jacket to go to Oxford with, and then I exchanged it for a donkey jacket, and she had to see me being arrested on the TV news all the time. And would say things like, oh, darling, I mean, I don't terribly mind, it's just that I do a bit when my friends ring up and say they're so sorry to see you.
But then when she did break out, there was the tragedy, which is one of the great tragedies in this, of this book, which you don't have to talk about if you don't want to. People can read the book to find it. But it is a very, very extraordinary tale.
Well, if I've written about it, I guess I have to be asked about it. I mean, my father was a very honest man and a very brave and honorable one, and very sparing with himself and very self-denying. And in many ways an exemplary character, but in the words that I learned from my mother, he was boring. He bored her. And she used to say to me, that's the one thing you can't do, it's the one unforgivable sin. And so when she could, when my brother and I were grown up, she exchanged him for a guy who wasn't boring at all, who was a bad poet and a charmer, and a former spoiled priest of the Church of England, and an all-round, you know, plausible character, but who was bipolar and a failure, and couldn't hold a job, and whose charm wore off. And I think she realized that the last love of her life was a flop, and she wasn't going to get another chance. And she could see it stretching all before her, and decided that life wasn't on those terms worth living anymore, and made a suicide pact with him. I think under pressure from him. I had to do a long investigation at one point. And killed herself with him in an act that was first reported in the papers as a murder. So I had to go to Greece when I read about it, thinking I was going to a crime scene and arriving at one, and then finding that no, it wasn't, that she loved him enough to even if she didn't want to die, she loved someone who did badly need to die and wanted to take her with him. So that was a facer, and a particularly bad one for my father, because he knew she was with another guy, but it wasn't public. It wasn't. They were very respectable about it. If he needed her to come with him to a sherry party, she'd go, and there'd be nothing said. So everyone found out about it, and about her, all on the same day, and in the press. It must have been a titanic shock for him.
Yeah.
So that was the end of my family life, in a way.
Yeah, and after that, the book turns political, I think would be fair to say, not least in Greece, where the Hitchens story of looking out at the world, finding out which side you're on, and